What would have happened if Mozart lived longer? This is probably one of the great questions in music history, considering that he only lived to be 35 years old and still managed to compose over 600 pieces, which is just an insane level of productivity if you ask me. Now in his later works, Mozart shows a particular degree of mastery. For example, his last 3 symphonies can be seen as the pinnacle of symphonic writing of the time, but we do already find some indications that he was moving away from the classical style a little bit. For example, the second to last sonata in B major shows some modulations that are reminiscent of what would later become Schubert's style. Also his minor sonatas like the sonata number 8 and 14 in A and C minor are a bit reminiscent of what would later become Beethoven's style. And then of course there's the quartet number 19 in C major, which is called dissonant. Why? Because it starts in a very dissonant manner, which is something that we would expect to hear maybe 100 years later, but not in the classical period which Mozart was a part of. Coming back to Beethoven, he's interesting in particular because we tend to separate his life into 3 periods, the early, the mid and the late period. And if you compare, for example, his early and late works, they are very different pieces. Of course it's all Beethoven, but stylistically drastically different. Now I personally have no reason to believe it would have been any different for Mozart. I'm sure he would have went on to experiment with different influences and would have created something that is impossible for us to even imagine. Now it is interesting to think, would music history have taken the same development? Are Schubert and Beethoven and the later Romantic period a logical progression of the classical period? Or would music history have taken a completely different turn? Now this is of course all purely speculative. I believe it would have been a mixture of both. Of course music history would have been different, but I think it would have probably developed in a similar direction than it actually ended up happening. You're free to let me know what you think would have happened in the comments, and of course follow for more classical music insights. I'll see you in the next video.